What are we? Almost December. It's very gray here. Big deficits usually lead to big concerns, but Stehanie Kelton has got a totally different opinion. The economist and author of the best-selling book, The Deficit Myth, looks at debt and deficit in a different way. She's become the face of modern monetary theory that says balanced budgets are overrated. Stehanie Kelton will join us after. Oh, she joins us right now. There she is. Stehanie Kelton, nice to see you again.
Nice to be with you. Thanks.
So you've overheard us there talking a lot about economic updates. Tomorrow, Canada will present one. The deficit will probably be at an all-time high once again. It's got a lot of people worried. What would you say to people worried about a huge deficit, the biggest deficit we've ever seen?
Don't worry. That's the really important message. You know, the deficit, so many people perceive this thing to be part of the problem. And the reality is that it is in a very important way part of the solution to getting out of the real problem that we're in, which is a recession induced by a health pandemic, right? And these deficits are really important. They're playing an important role in getting us to the other side of this. And so people need to take a deep breath, sort of, exhale and recognize that, this thing that we hear about all the time that people tell us is such a scary and dangerous thing is really nothing more than the difference between two numbers. That's what the deficit is. It's the difference between how many dollars the government is spending into the economy to support it and how many dollars it's subtracting back out, mostly in the form of taxes. So a deficit is nothing more than the financial contribution that the Canadian government is making to the rest of the economy. That's important.
Can you give, I know this is hard because you've written a whole book about it, but could you give a short definition for people about modern monetary theory, that just the basics, so people can understand where you're coming from?
Sure. So essentially, in a nutshell, we want to recognize that the monetary system that is in place today in a country like Canada or in a country like the US and Australia, Japan, and many others is in no way like the monetary systems of yesteryear. We are not on a gold standard. We're not on a fixed exchange rate system. The monetary system has changed in important ways, especially post-1971. We had this international monetary system called Bretton Woods. Countries were fixing their exchange rates to one another's currencies. And then through the US dollar, the currency was convertible into gold internationally. All of that is gone. Mm-hmm. And because the monetary system has changed in these fundamental ways, it has opened up policy space for governments to orient their budgets more freely. In other words, governments face fewer constraints under the new monetary system than they faced under an old fixed exchange rate gold standard type of system. So there's more capacity for governments to run budgets more appropriately when the economy is weak. And that really is kind of a game changer.
Yeah, that was a very good explanation. I'm sure you've had to do that before in a short period of time. I want to play a clip, if I can, to you of our Finance Minister and Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland, who you might even know, commenting on her thoughts on modern monetary theory. Here's what she said just last month.
I am not among those who think Canada should have a fling with modern monetary theory, which holds that deficits don't matter for a government that issues debt in its own currency.
Stehanie Kelton, Chrystia Freeland has been an economist herself. She's studied it, and there she is saying that this isn't the kind of thing I want to consider. Is that because it is too risky politically? Do you think for governments to state openly that this is a viable path?
Well, look, you say she studied it. I'm not sure what the it is in that sentence. She studied some economics, but it's not clear from that statement that she studied anything from the MMT kind of canon or the literature or the scholarship. So when she says, I'm not someone who believes that deficits don't matter, well, neither am I. So if she's under the impression that MMT is about deficits don't matter, then I think we have pretty good evidence that she hasn't actually understood what MMT is saying. MMT is saying deficits matter, but they don't matter the way that we've been taught to believe they matter.
So we also in this country talk a lot about a fiscal anchor, or the government currently is talking about guardrails. And the importance for this government has been to keep our debt to GDP ratio in line. Does that make sense to you in terms of trying to manage a deficit and over the longer term debt?
No. I don't think that there is any particular importance. I would certainly never target a ratio like the ratio of debt relative to the size of the Canadian economy or to the size of the U.S. economy. You look at Japan, for example, where the debt to GDP ratio is something like 240%. So orders of magnitude higher than anything you have in Canada or anything we have here in the U.S. And yet the government's interest rate on 10-year bonds in Japan is zero. They can't get inflation up to 2%. And so the things that we would want to worry about with respect to a government's budget position, are things like the inflationary pressures that might be caused. And so there's just no evidence that that ratio is in and of itself anything important.
So then to the fiscal conservatives in this country and the members of the official opposition who would say to you, well, we cannot go on like this. We will leave this as a problem for future generations. What would you say to them?
So look, it is not a problem for future generations. These are financial assets. What we're talking about, this word gets in the way, right? Because we call this the public debt or the national debt. And that word is intrusive and unhelpful. So what we should recognize is that what the Canadian government is doing is it is providing, as part of the support that it's providing to the economy, Canadian government bonds. Okay, those are financial assets to their holders. This is something that becomes part of the wealth of the bondholders. So think about it this way. When the government is running a fiscal deficit, it's adding more dollars to the economy than it is subtracting. So using really simple numbers, suppose a Canadian government spends $100 into the economy and only taxes $90 back out. Its deficit has made a contribution, a financial contribution of $10 to some part of the Canadian economy. It could stop there and just leave the 10 Canadian dollars sitting in someone's hands, but it doesn't. Instead, it matches up its deficit spending by selling Canadian government bonds. So here's what happens. The Canadian government subtracts those 10 Canadian dollars back out and replaces them with 10 Canadian government bonds. Okay, so both of these are financial instruments, both issued by the Canadian government. They can't come from anywhere else. And so what really happens is the government is making a contribution in the form of a Canadian government bond. That's a financial asset. That's part of someone's wealth. When the bond matures, what happens? The government retires it by returning its original form of payment. It just pays back Canadian dollars. There's nothing inherently dangerous about any of this. What matters is, are you making investments that are supporting the economy? Are you avoiding an inflation problem? And apart from that, the deficit itself, again, as I started off saying, is part of the solution to the problem we're facing.
Stehanie Kelton, I wish I had longer, but you did an awfully good job explaining a very complicated theory, and I've enjoyed listening to you on podcasts and your book very much. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, that's Stehanie Kelton. We're going to take a short break here on RBL. Back right after this.